Thanks, Steve, and Jim, for allowing me to speak to you today. I know we just heard from another of our Army leaders, so we're really excited to kind of capture the stage here this morning, and really appreciate the opportunity to address all of you. I've got a few topics to get through today, and then definitely look forward to your questions. So what I plan to talk about is three things. One is kind of what's going on with the Army's Transformation and Training Command. The second is what the Army is doing within the acquisition transformation strategy within the department. And then finally, as a subset of that acquisition transformation strategy, what we're doing in the C2 and counter C2 space. So I'll start off with T2 comm because I've got a couple of roles now within the Army, and in that capacity I serve as one of our senior civilian directors within Transformation and Training Command. So, I want to kind of address the why behind that. We've been underway, initial operational capability reached in October of last year, so not entirely too long. And just as a kind of a refresher, this was created through SecWar direction through the Army Transformation Initiative, largely as a combination of what was Army Futures Command and our Training and Doctrine Command, or TRADOC. So, you've got on one hand, only a 7-year organization that was built really to be very flat and very aggressive when it comes to our kind of reform efforts and what we were doing specifically in putting kit in the hands of our soldiers. And then TRADOC, a 50-year-old organization, had its legacy coming out of the Vietnam War, really purpose-built to ensure that we had the best trained and led soldiers in the world. And so there's a sort of a natural synergy between them. And largely now, T2COM is enabling the Army's continuous transformation within our operational force. And that's changed, of course, as well under the same directive. We no longer have a Forces Command. We have a Western Hemisphere Command. And the implication of that is that we are essentially a Army Service Combatant Command aligned Army and a COCOM aligned Army. So our operational force is largely in support of that. We're on this institutional side, helping Army leaders enable continuous transformation. And so if you look at the constituents of T2COM, it really runs the continuum from force generation to force design to force development, which I think is critical to our success. We've got 3 major subordinate commands, all led by a 3-star general. We've got the U.S. Army Recruiting Command on the generation side. Some of you may know that we've had a very recent recruiting success. We hit our numbers 4 months ahead of schedule last year, the first time we were ahead in over 10 years. So we've definitely turned a corner on that through General Davis and the outstanding work of his team. We've got the Futures and Concepts Command led by Lieutenant General Mac McCurry. They are really focused on concepts, experimentation. Very importantly, they house our requirements process within T2COM, so we'll get to that with acquisition in a moment here. And also, they manage all of the command's science and technology enterprise. So our DevCom labs and our medical research development command up at Fort Detrick, it falls within their purview. And then finally, we've got the Combined Arms Command led by Lieutenant General Jim Eisenhower, who are enabling the development, refinement of doctrine, training, and leader development. So all of this really combined within T2COM into a single threat-informed framework that enables Army continuous transformation. So I'll give you 4 major takeaways from kind of the command perspective before I shift into acquisition. Number 1 is that we are ensuring that the operational feedback that we're receiving, that it informs capability development. That should sort of be a no-brainer, but I know many of you got a lot of experience in this business, and you can understand how far, away from that we have become in some of our capability development efforts. So we are directly taking that operational feedback, feeding it into what we're doing on capability development very quickly. Number 2, we are reducing barriers to innovation wherever they exist. Number 3, we're being very transparent about our gap areas, or we are trying to be very transparent and always welcome feedback from you all, because we need industry to be developing solutions against the problems that we see and the gaps that we see. We don't need you delivering solutions against things that we say need to be the solution. I think that's where we've gotten ourselves into a little bit of trouble in the past. We're really in the problem identification business, and industry is really in the solutions business. And then finally, just to dovetail with that, we recognize that industry partnership is crucial and essential to our ability to continuously transform the Army. So part and parcel of that, and I'll shift now to kind of acquisition transformation. So I know you're all aware this was launched at the Sec Board level last November. It's being implemented in the Army as well as the other departments. Really all about speed, flexibility, and execution, or you could think of that as really kind of a bias to action. There are many components of the strategy, everything from contracting reform to how we're engaging in venture capital, private capital space. But one of the foremost components is this concept of the portfolio acquisition executive or a PAE. And so this is a very distinct identity from a PEO or program executive officer. And what it really boils down to is that ability to take on requirements and resourcing, as well as what PEOs traditionally would take on in terms of the acquisition and contracting approach. This is often talked about as sort of the three-legged stool of so-called big A acquisition, and it's also often pointed to as the reasons for acquisition failure, is the misalignment of those abilities. We have not had in our acquisition structure the ability to exercise direct influence over all of those areas inherent in any kind of a capability area previously. So it's critically important. The acquisition transformation strategy, it envisioned the services starting initially with pilots, maybe one or two. Within the Army, we had all of our PAEs across the entirety of our modernization efforts in place on day one. So we are absolutely fully embedded within this, and we've been ongoing now since the November timeframe. We've got 6 PAEs across the entire Army, and when you think about it, previously we had 12 PEOs managing actually a smaller subset because they didn't have that requirements resourcing capability. So it's an extreme streamlining of the way that we manage our acquisition process and procedures. The structure within the Army is pretty unique. We have what's called a dual, we're terming a dual support structure within our PAEs. So we are supported by and we directly report to both the Army Acquisition Executive, Honorable Ingraham, as well as the commander of T2COM, General Dave Hodney. And so that relationship is what is going to enable us to move quickly at speed because we don't really have the excuses of, well, we're not in the sort of chain of command that controls one part of acquisition or the other. It's really all embedded. When you look at the 6 that we have also, our 6 PAEs, and we've got kind of our principal PAEs and then our deputy roles in each of them. And what you'll notice also unique to the Army, I believe, is it's really a combination of talent. We've got sort of our standard acquisition experience. That's what I represent, and some of our other general officers who are PAEs within the Army. But we're also combining that either in a principal or a deputy role with really deep warfighting experience through the commanding generals of our centers of excellence, those that are involved in the DOT-MIL PF process, the training in particular of our warfighters, no matter what the warfighting function. And so this, again, I think that structure is going to help us overcome some of the historic tensions and gaps that we've had in the past when it comes to getting capability out the door. So the 6 that we have within the Army, we've got fires, and I think you'll be hearing from PAE fires here later this afternoon, General Frank Lozano. We've got expanded maneuver air, expanded maneuver ground, agile sustainment, layered protection, and then finally C2 and counter C2. So that's my other job. I'm the PAE for C2, counter C2. And so, kind of to wrap up the intro remarks here, I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of what that portfolio entails. So C2 and counter C2, really what it comes down to is decision dominance, right? The ability to sense, understand, act, and decide faster than our adversary, and also to counter their ability to do the same against us. If you want to look, kind of zoom in into what's within the portfolio. So I have 3 what were previously known as PEOs. In our new structure within Army acquisition, these are termed capability program executives. So they have kind of the exclusive domain of acquisition, where the PAEs have that, as well as the resourcing requirements, some other elements. So the 3 that I've got, first I'll mention is the C2 Information Network And all these names are new, by the way. The PEO structures you may recognize, but they do have some new names to kind of signify what they're doing. So C2 Information Network basically is delivering next generation C2. That's what that entire CPE is focused on, and I know Mr. Obadal referenced that in his remarks earlier. It's a critical component of our transformation strategy, and so they're very laser focused on that. The second that we have is Intel and Spectrum Warfare. And so we've got a number of key programs underneath this. I'll just name a few that you'll probably recognize. We've got the Titan program, the Tactical Intelligence Targeting Access Node, AIDP, our Army Intel Data Platform. We've got our terrestrial layer system, which is really how we bring SIGINT and EW really at echelon to our forces. We've got aerial ISR, and we've got assured position navigation and timing also within that portfolio, and many other things, but those are some of our key programs that you may recognize. And then finally, we've got the CPE for Simulation Training, Test, and Threat. That's our third CPE. Major focus area there is on Next-Gen Constructive, or NGC, which is bringing much improved simulation capability for collective training for our forces. They also have a big role in our modernization of our combat training centers, giving our OPFOR modernized capabilities so that our soldiers can fight and train in much more realistic environments. And then finally, in terms of where we spend our money, the fourth element I would just mention is we do have a dedicated system center or lab that manages all of the Army's investments within our science and technology resource areas that have to do with C2 or counter C2. So we've got Ms. Beth Berry that runs that part of the program. So that's kind of what's in the portfolio. I'll mention kind of what we're moving forward in terms of our overall acquisition strategy for the entire portfolio. Comes down to just a few elements. First of all, as Honorable Obadal mentioned, and as is inherent in our acquisition transformation strategy across the department, we are commercial first. And as I mentioned, that's core everywhere. I don't think of a better place to be demonstrating that than the portfolio that I'm managing. It is extremely commercial first, right? To the point where it's challenging to think of a capability that we would need to provide that we wouldn't be better off generating from a commercial source or from something that is commercially developed. So that is a huge shift. We were heading in that direction. We're making a much larger pivot now in the way that we're managing that acquisition. Part and parcel of that is our ability to rapidly field and tech refresh. And this is really important as well, because if we have a commercial first strategy, it means that we're on sort of a commercial tech refresh baseline. So we can no longer really afford to stretch out our fieldings to Army units for critical C2 capability. We shouldn't do it anyway, but we really can't afford it if we're baselined on commercial, because the commercial tech refresh cycle is going to work faster than 10 or 15 years. And so our mandate really is to get this capability out to our force as quickly as possible so that we can reset the tech debt that we've inherited and put all of our operational units on pace to be refreshing that at the pace of commercial technology, not just kind of what we're able to budget for within the Army. The third is our enabling of the joint force, and so we work very closely with General Gutlein and others that are playing a significant role in this. We're going to be doing this largely through our open interfaces and our ability to be descriptive about the capabilities that we are building and providing. Standards have their place, but we are not over-standardizing what we're doing. We're building it inherently open so that these connections can be a lot more seamless. We're merging the enterprise and tactical data environments. Those of you who have spent any time in the Army, and I suspect the other services are maybe not that different, we sort of have these two totally different worlds when you look at our enterprise data systems and our business systems and then our tactical and our operational. There's really no reason for them to be as separate as they are. This information when you look at the AI tools that we need to enable across large data sets to develop understandings, this is sort of a false difference that is just going to inhibit our ability to move quickly from a data perspective. So we're very focused on tearing down those walls. Similarly, between our training and our operational environment, having training systems be one thing and what our soldiers fight on be something different, we need to eliminate that. And then finally, I would just mention the encouragement of industry self-teaming. We've seen this really outstanding within the Next Gen C2 program, we're looking to some additional programs to start enabling that type of that type of interface between the Army and industry, because industry is much better, from my perspective and my experience in acquisition, in kind of self-selecting, figuring out what you're good at, where you can be complementary. When you start getting us involved in that, I don't know that we're always coming at it from, kind of the best informed perspective. So the extent that industry can do that as you approach us, instead of having a slice of a solution or coming in and saying, I can vertically integrate everything that you have, understand that you probably have something that you're very good at, and many other companies have things that could be very complementary to what you're doing. And to the extent that you can kind of figure some of that out as you approach us and talk about the value you might provide in any of these priorities, it will be much appreciated. So that's kind of the once over the world, T2Com, acquisition reform, and C2 and counter C2. And I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
The first question I'd kind of like to ask you, and it has to do with speed of refresh. If you talk about commercialization, you talk about, whether it's Apple, Droid, whatever, it used to be that we would refresh, as you were saying, 7 to 15 years. Industry commercialization said 3 to 5 years. I don't think 3 to 5 years is a good number anymore either. So I'd like to kind of get your opinion on that. But while you're doing that, you're looking at a $1.5 trillion defense budget, perhaps. And if that, what size of that's going to come to you, and how will that impact on NGC2, and then ridding ourselves of old infrastructure?
Yeah, Steve, a good question. I mean, we clearly need to be accelerating, so I'll kind of take the end of that first. So we'd previously announced an acceleration, a 30-month timeline to get rid of an element within our C2 architecture that is just old and obsolete, and the replacement is very clear. This, for those of you that are very familiar with our programs, this is the Warfighter Information Network Tactical, or the WIN-T effort that provided beyond line of sight communications on relatively large satellite apertures that were mounted on platforms. They had to be driven around. And there's way better solutions out there for that. Multi-orbit, new modems, more expeditionary capability. And so we're really clear about the solution space in that, and that's an acceleration effort we had previously announced. We're very optimistic about the ability to accelerate next-gen C2 based on the prototyping successes that we've demonstrated already within 4th ID and 25th ID. So I can't speak specifically to the budget ahead of our rollout, but we're very focused on how we can ensure that we accelerate that to the points I made earlier. On the whole tech refresh, 3 to 5 years maybe being too old as well, to me it kind of depends on what we're talking about. Like at the fastest turnover, AI models, I would imagine we're going to be turning those over extremely rapidly. It could be multiple times per day. Our software applications are going to go through evolutions that is relatively rapid, and we've created an environment now where we actually can change software applications relatively quickly. It won't move as fast as AI models. Also, relatively quickly, when we're leveraging commercial phones, commercial tablets, those kinds of things, right? There are still some investment areas that I think will maybe hit that 3 to 5 years. My point overall is that we don't want to get too far out of sync with where commercial technology is. We don't want to be buying 10-year-old phones just because that's the architecture that we had built against, or tactical edge compute nodes or something like that. If we find ourselves unable to do that, we probably have to go look at how can we drive unit costs down, what can we do with regard to density, what are other ways we can solve this problem, because I don't want to be sacrificing that time element, because then we're behind, we're not using commercial technology anymore, we become a unique customer, and we pay for that privilege dearly.
Well done. Thanks so much for talking with us today, Joe. You have a really big job now, but I know NGC2 is still very near and dear to your heart. What are you most excited about what you've done today, and what do you think the biggest challenge in front of you still is?
Yeah, it's good to see you, Dana. Yeah, thanks. I'm most excited about kind of the how quickly we've been able to move when we have removed some of the standard processes inherent to acquisition that would have stretched out efforts, for quite a long time. So as an example, our typical requirement document development process is 12 to 24 months. And it generally produces a document that's somewhere between 50 and 100 pages long that a program manager then has to go and parse out so they can understand how to communicate that to industry through a spec, and then go through some type of competition process. We've lost before we even started playing the game in a model like that. Within NGC2, which is a very significant effort, our level of requirement is 4 pages long. We revalidated this with the Chief of Staff of the Army, General George, back in January, as he's the Title X requirements owner for the service, and that's his comfort level, because he recognizes how quickly things may change in this space, and he recognizes the challenge of, if we were to have to come back through Army staff, go back into an Army Requirements Oversight Council in order to make slight changes to what we're doing, again, we wouldn't even be able to get out of the gate. So, with that kind of a framework, what we've been able to demonstrate so far in our prototyping is just nothing short of amazing to me. I mean, if you think of the soldier touch points that we started talking about when AFC was getting formed, this is sort of that, but all the time, continuous. And in terms of, my concern, I recognize that pivoting from prototyping to scale, that's going to be the biggest, the next biggest hurdle for sure. So what we're already looking at in the prototyping efforts are areas that they're working, but we recognize aren't going to be able to scale out with a lower level of kind of touch labor, with a less of a volume of different vendors out there helping to make this work, less of the soldier's time maybe being dedicated to understanding how this capability will work or how it can improve, versus focusing on their operational mission and just having it be an enabler. But I'm super excited to be leading that, and very encouraged by what we're seeing so far. Thanks.
Question over on the right.
Matt Baynard, Defense Daily. In the last budget cycle, the Army sought agile funding authority for targeted categories of drones, CUAS, and EW, and appropriators granted some budget line item consolidation, but not that full authority. So from your broader T2COM role, do the PAEs have the level of flexibility built in order to really maximize this portfolio approach? And then specifically within your NGC2 role, is the flexibility there to be able to make the choices and trade-offs with the authority that you have, not getting that agile funding authority?
Yeah, I'll take the second one first on NGC2, because it's a more specific question. So, we've met with the appropriators recently ahead of our 27 rollout, just to kind of talk about the funding line structure. And I guess I would explain it like this. If you look at what we were doing before, we were buying a bunch of vertically integrated systems, right? And so that's what our budget materials would reflect, right? We're going to buy this system, System A, System B, System C, System D, and it would do basically the whole thing, right? From the soldier interface to the software application to the the networking, wireless or whatever network capability, et cetera, right? So very vertically integrated model. If you've kind of looked at what we're doing within Next Gen C2, we're talking about a tech stack that is very horizontal, right? Where we've got an application layer. We have a integrated data layer that kind of pulls everything together, and the ability to share that. Infrastructure below that, and transport, which is any means of network communication. So we kind of went from this to that. And so we have to update our budget in order to just communicate transparently with the Hill, with the appropriators, and with our leadership. We kind of had to make those adjustments in order to do that. So you could talk about, I guess, flexibility or budget line consolidation, but to me, it's really about our ability to transparently talk about what we're doing there. You mentioned the other lines that there was some consolidation on. For the other PAEs and the way T2COM's looking at it, yeah, I mean, I think we certainly value the ability to be able to adjust as needed as conditions change. And so we are taking a look at the entire, it's on its way to rollout, taking a look at all of the budget materials, and also taking a look at how we describe what we're doing within the text of those materials, to be very clear about what we intend to do, but also to ensure that we've got some ability to react as needed to a very fast-paced changing technology landscape.
As we're waiting for the next question, how important is MOSA in what you're doing right now? And what would you tell industry is your need there?
Yeah, I mean, open standards approach, I think, is part and parcel of being able to have any type of a innovative, adaptive system. So I don't focus so much, and I kind of referred to this earlier, on deep specification level. specifications have a role there, but increasingly what we're finding is the ability to connect disparate systems together has as much to do with their ability to describe their interfaces adequately as it has to do with compliance to a standard. So the challenge we've had with standards in the past is that there's already a lot of things out there that maybe not standardized, but we need to be able to use. And so, if your approach is, well, we'll just create a standard for everything and it'll all comply, you might be waiting a long time. Whereas an approach for modular open systems, where if you're going to connect into a system, you need to be able to define your interfaces, provide a software development kit if that's what necessary. So that's what we're doing, for example, in Next-Gen C2, and we'll do in some other areas. It provides that inherent ability to be able to work within a system without getting too prescriptive. So that's kind of the approach we're taking with MOSA.
Sir, well, again, when we just heard General Gutling speaking, he was talking about all the authorities that came. Do you feel now that you and the PAEs have the authorities you need? And if not, what authorities would you ask to have increased?
Yeah, I think we do, and I'll just caveat it with, we're very early on in this process, so there's a lot of momentum involved in what we're doing. There are very strong personalities that are all leading in these roles, and they're leading at the very beginning of a new way of doing business. So I don't want to get too carried away and say that that's just naturally going to endure. I do think we have some work to do as we move through, this initial phase of PAEs and what they do and how they interact within ASALT, within T2COM, and then with the larger Army staff and secretariat. The short answer is I think we have what we need right now. I guess where I want to make sure we're at is that as we move into kind of the next generation of leaders that would lead these PAEs, that it's unquestionably clear about the ability that they have to do their jobs the same way that has been embedded within the PAEs that we have today. And so at that point, we're past the kind of initial forming momentum stage, and we will need to make sure that we've got, a lot of clarity when it comes down to some of the details on the authorities. But right now, we're really leveraging authorities that are inherent in the organizations that are all direct support reporting into the PAEs, and I think that's working great right now.
Oh, over here, sir. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Tony Morash from Aeronix Technologies Group. A feature of the new construct is centralizing experiments and demonstrations. How do you think that's going so far, and what do you hope to see out of that centralization?
Can you repeat your premise on centralizing experiments?
Yeah, it seems like from General Francis's briefs that he's doing on his roadshow that the experiments will come along with the requirements. It'll be a single sort of front door, whether it's in the FCC or something like that, by which the experiments are more streamlined rather than the units themselves kind of doing a series of experiments.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, certainly one thing that's been great about what the Army's been doing under continuous transformation is sort of the innovation explosion, if you will. The ability of lots of units are kind of getting in on the how can they do small unit experimentation at divisions and corps. One element I hadn't mentioned in our overall ACT reform effort, in addition to the 6 PAEs, we've got an element known as the PIT for innovative technology, which is really focused there on our Army service combatant commands as well as our core level. So really at the operational level, they are embedding sort of that acquisition expertise. They are working in partnership with Futures and Concepts Command for experimentation requirements so that we're not getting too out of touch between there. What we didn't want is all of these activities to be happening across the Army and an inability to integrate the lessons learned, observations, and findings out of that. So it's that type of streamlining in my mind is very critical, and it's a key role of FCC as well as the PIT in order to do that. It doesn't mean that we don't have still some specific efforts with specific units for purposes. I think all the PAs are gonna do that. The PIT's gonna align that way as well. But it's really about we don't want this sort of like innovation happening everywhere, and then we're not collectively benefiting from the product of that. That's really, I think, what General Francis has been getting at in his AOSA talks. Thanks.
Well, sir, we want to thank you very much for coming and speaking to us. Thank you for taking up some extra time at my request because, unfortunately, as we said, Miss Melissa Johnson could not be here. She couldn't get a flight here. So, fortunately, he said he'd step up and take a few extra questions. We appreciate you. And I'd like to get a big round of applause for him.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it very much.